everybody, I'm Vanessa, and today I want to share with you 5 of the roses that perform best in my garden. I garden in a zone 7B. I think they recently changed the zone to make it a little bit warmer, but I don't know exactly what it is, but it's always been 7B the whole time I've been gardening, and so I go by those guidelines. But more importantly, our summers are very hot, but also very humid, and that's probably the more important part with regards to climate as we talk about these roses. It's extremely humid here, which means that we deal with a lot of fungal diseases. Black spot is very common on roses around here. And so for me, when I'm looking for roses, one of the main things on my list is that I want them to be black spot resistant. I mentioned fungal diseases earlier, and these are diseases that plants get that thrive in damp areas. So when our summers remain at like 90% humidity or sometimes 100% humidity, it's extremely hard for the plant leaves to dry well enough to not welcome those fungi that are going to create these diseases. And black spot is one of the main ones that roses tend to get. Botrytis is another one that I've been learning about recently. I might mention a little bit more about that later, because one of my roses that I want to recommend to you, that I'm not going to recommend to you, tend to get that one. But otherwise, black spot is definitely the main thing we deal with here. Now, generally, black spot is not something that's going to kill your plants. It's just going to make it look extremely ugly because it's something that affects the leaves in particular. Now, we can make a video about black spot and other fungal diseases another time, but I specifically wanted to talk about that one because if you're a new gardener and you're trying to establish your roses and the leaves keep getting black spot, it's going to affect the growth of the plant a little bit, if not a lot, really, because you need those leaves in order for your plant to be able to properly photosynthesize so that it can have good root growth to encourage the plant to keep growing. Do you see what I mean? And so most people will tell you that black spot doesn't typically affect your roses, except that it affects the aesthetics of it. But I would argue that especially as you're getting a rose going, it's important that you avoid black spot as much as possible, because the healthier the leaves, the better the plant is going to be able to grow. Which is why I want to recommend the 5 roses I'm going to recommend to you. And it's not limited to these 5. It just happens to be that I have these 5 in my garden. And you'll notice very quickly that these roses are by the breeder Kordes. Now, you may see different sub-names for this breeder, and I'll include some of them here in the video. I should at this point tell you that I have no affiliation with these people. They don't know that I exist. However, I do want to be helpful to you. And so despite the fact that they don't know I exist, I feel it's only right that I tell you about the quality of these roses, especially for us Southern gardeners. Now, roses are a highly hybridized plant. That means that throughout the years, there have been people who have been taking one trait from a rose and another trait from another rose and have been bringing them together to create a whole different kind of rose. And so it might be that someone wants a rose that has big, beautiful blooms that are also highly scented. Now, that doesn't naturally happen, but if someone decides to breed it that way, with a lot of effort, given enough time, they can succeed in that. So that's what I mean by a breeder. Now, Kordes is a breeder, and from what I understand, I've not looked into this very deeply. From what I understand, a lot of his work has been done to create roses that will survive in high humidity. And I have to tell you that at least in my garden, the proof is in the pudding. In fact, the only reason I know this is because I was so incredibly impressed after I planted those roses that I was like, what is going on? And then I remembered that I had seen the name Kordes on these roses when I was buying them back in the day, because I bought them just because they looked pretty. I didn't know anything about breeders when I bought these roses, but they looked extremely beautiful, and I was like, okay, I'll buy them. And they thrived in my garden, and I was like, what is going on? And so at that point, I was reading the tags and I realized they were all Kordes roses. The last piece of information that I might share with you that might encourage you, that might seal the deal for you, is the fact that I don't even amend my soil when I plant these. Because this is a video for beginners, I feel like I should also explain what amending your soil is. Now, I garden in an area where the soil is just clay. In fact, it's red clay. It is hard as a rock in the middle of summer and there's no rain. And when there is rain, it's like a muddy mess. Some people would say that it's extremely hard to garden in. I guess I would agree with that. But the fact of the matter is, I do not amend my soils extremely heavily. I mulch, and the mulch over time feeds my garden, but I don't go and add loads of compost to my soil every year to better it. I'd have to be buying loads and loads of compost, and even the compost that I make on site is not enough. And so I just don't have the resources to do that. But yet I find that with most things that I plant, they do well. This is not true of all roses that I plant. Part of the reason some of the roses in my garden don't thrive is because I don't always amend my soil. I've since learned my lesson that when I plant roses, I have to amend my soil. So that just means that I add some compost and I mix it in with the native red clay soil, and I plant my roses in that, back in the ground. Obviously, it's still surrounded by the native soil, and with time, the roots of the roses are going to grow out into the native soil. They're going to grow out of the mixture that I create for them into the native soil, and that's the best way to integrate them into your native soil. I do not do that with Kordes roses. It's because a few years ago, when I bought them, I didn't know to do this. I was not as experienced in gardening. You know how it is, you gain experience as you go. I didn't know to do this, and so I never did it. Every single one of them survived. And so let me share with you the 5 roses. But before I do, I promise I will list them. But I think this is important to share with you. It's not so much about these 5 specific roses. It's the fact that this breeder is worth taking a chance on if you live in the humid South. That's the point I'm trying to make here. These 5 roses are just sort of icing on the cake and gives you a place to start. The first one is the rose called Zaire, Zaire. It's a beautiful pink double flowered rose. I mean, it's very beautiful. It's reminiscent of, you know, the beautiful David Austen roses that everyone is fawning about with good reason. But it's just absolutely beautiful. And I mean, it's never missed a beat. It is said to be a shrub rose. I find that honestly in my garden, I treat it as a mini climber. In fact, I have it climbing on the sides of my shed garden, and it's just absolutely beautiful. So I treat it as a climber. I have 2 of them and never misses a beat. I mean, never a hint of black spot. The leaves are nice and green and beautiful. It blooms all the time. I mean, I'm sure it's got to have periods where it doesn't bloom. That time period must be so short because I feel like I always see it in bloom. Anyway, of all the ones in my garden, I hate to say that one's my favorite, but I feel like I notice it so much because I see it out of my kitchen window and it's just always blooming. The next one is a white one called polar bear. Again, it's just absolutely beautiful. It's so good. It, just like Zaire, just blooms all the time. Similarly to Zaire, I grow that one as a climber also on the side of my house. And I'm just so incredibly pleased with that rose. It's just absolutely beautiful. And in the spring, it's one of the things I look forward to the most because it often, I have some peonies there as well. And it's just so beautiful. And if I happen to get around to planting foxgloves as well, it's so incredibly beautiful. And I'm such a fan of this rose, polar bear. The next one is a rose called South Africa. Okay. South Africa made me realize how much I love a yellow rose. The first 2 roses that I mentioned are not scented. I don't care because their bloom power just speaks for itself and earns them a spot of one of the roses worth growing for me. Now, South Africa, the yellow rose does have a scent. I mean, like all other roses, at least in my area, the scent is more prevalent in the spring and also in the early mornings. It's a beautiful rose, um, and that one is worth growing as well. I have it in front of my house because I love a yellow rose and I wanted it to make an impact here. And that one blooms continually as well. It takes, all roses take some sort of a break, but I'm always impressed by how quickly they come back. The next one is a yellow one called Sweet Jane. Both South Africa and Sweet Jane do grow for me more like the typical shrub roses as opposed to the other two that I treat more as climbers. Sweet Jane is a yellow rose as well, but it has more of a coppery tone. The rose called South Africa is definitely more of a true yellow, whereas this one starts to lend itself towards like a brownish orange. You see what I mean? Like it's a yellow, but it's definitely more of a muted yellow, more of a bronzy yellow for sure. I have 3 of those and they are just fantastic, just absolutely beautiful. Unfortunately for me, the deer also think they're absolutely lovely and delicious and tend to devour them before all of the other roses, but still absolutely beautiful. The last one is a rose called, you could say Bajazzo or maybe Bajazzo. I don't know. It depends on how you want to read it, but it's a climber. This one is a climber, and I treat it as such. And it is a once blooming rose. And in the spring, it is absolutely beautiful, and it blooms for like a month. It's not one I ever hear people talk about. I don't even know how I stumbled upon this rose. I think it was at a store one time and maybe on sale even, and I bought it. And I'm so glad that I did because it's not one that blooms throughout the entire season, but it blooms for so long and it's so full of blooms when it does bloom that it's worth it for me to have in my garden. It's a rose that starts out red and it ages to a pink. It's very interesting and very beautiful. Those 5 are the 5 that I've had the most experience with, and the story remains the same for all of them, and it's that they perform extremely well. No diseases on any of these roses, and they bloom their heads off, and I never even have to do anything special when I plant them. I hope that if you're a southern gardener, that this was helpful to you as a way to get you started with roses. I genuinely feel like I'm offering you what I know to be a foolproof method to get started with beautiful English looking kinds of roses that are going to wow people, and you won't have to work as much to keep them alive. I hope that this was helpful for you. If you have any questions, please let us know below. And if you are an experienced rose grower and you have some foolproof roses, one that you feel is an easy rose to grow, that is disease resistant, share with us below. Hi, I'm Vanessa. Thank you for watching this gardening video. I don't just make videos about gardening though. I make videos about anything and everything pertaining to creating beauty in the home so that you can create special moments for your family. Thank you so much for being here. I hope I see you next time.